Hi, and welcome to Old Women Who Write, to our feature interview this week with Susan Dukow. I'm excited about this interview. I've read the whole book that she just edited, and I've totally enjoyed it. Susan spent 36 years in the motion picture industry, which I want to hear about, working on award-winning films. After she retired in about 2012, is that right, Susan?
Correct.
She took up painting. I see Susan is the Renaissance women, as we all are. We recreate ourselves, we reinvent ourselves at whatever stage we are. And at 70, we've gotten good at it. At 80, we're really good at it.
I can't wait.
And now Susan has been on her latest adventure. Susan attended Girls High, which is an all-girls high school, prep school in Philadelphia. Isn't it funny? Nobody has to say Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's in Philadelphia. Her 1968 class did what all classes do, which was they go on, they live their lives, they get married, they don't get married, they have adventures. Then they had a reunion, and then another, and possibly another. And they discovered also the power of Facebook in this period. In the pandemic, they discovered the magic of Zoom. Finally, Susan asked them to write about their lives at Girls High and their lives now, especially as seen through the lens of the pandemic. 43 of her classmates took her up on the challenge, which I think is amazing. And Susan was the editor, resulting in Unmute Yourself, Girlfriend, a class act. Now, I know on the book front, Susan, there is a longer title, but I didn't know how to write that down. It says, Unmute Yourself, Girlfriend, a class act, a Zoom through the pandemic at 70. Okay.
A lot of play on words. A lot.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. So I'm really pleased to have you here. As I said, I enjoyed the book, and two friends and I wrote two books back in the day in the early 2000s, and one of them, one of my co-authors, went to Girls High. As a graduate of Girls High in about, I can't remember, it's 62 or 63 that she was graduated. So she couldn't believe she's coming to visit this coming week. So I am going to gift her with my copy of Unmute Yourself, Girlfriend.
Oh, make her buy her own copy.
Well, there is that. Okay, so first, Susan, fill us in a little bit about, because I'm intrigued. Tell me about your background in movies. What did you do?
I was a production coordinator / production supervisor. And now you'll say, what does that mean?
Yeah,
so,
pretty much.
Basically, it was my left side of my brain that was in motion, working in an office. Basically, the way a film works, people, who aren't in the industry, how would they know? They go to the movies and they think it just appears. But there's a lot of preparation work. And so there's an office, okay, a production office. And I ran the production office. And I'm like the focal point between the producers and the director on one side and the cast, and then the crew on the other side. So putting this book together was a piece of cake for me, because I was quite good at, I used to say, moving armies. So
and good with prima donnas.
Oh, exactly. And we didn't have too many prima donnas in the book, but there were a couple of stories, back stories, which we won't mention names. But yes, and Girls High, there's a particular type of woman who goes to Girls High too.
I get that. I saw that. Okay, so your background in the movies, except for the moving armies part of it, really had nothing to do with editing.
I had never edited anything in my life. I had never done anything like this in my life. I mean, let's segue into the book, because it really came out of the pandemic, and it came out of isolation and loneliness.
Yes.
Okay, on my part, I'm single. I've never been married. I don't have any children. So I found myself pretty isolated. And I'm a bit of a loner anyway. As social as I am and as outgoing as I am, I really like my time by myself. And I think that came from working with hundreds of people at a time. I also got involved with my union, and there was all kinds of things like that. And so anyway, but what happened was in May of, as you said in the introduction, we got involved after some reunions at Girls High from our class. The Facebook came into our worlds in 2009. So a couple of the gals started a private Facebook page for our class. And
And
so,
that's the class of 1968.
yes, also known as the 212 class.
Got it.
And so I just posted, I had been on one Zoom call with my family, okay? And what possessed me to post on our private page, anybody up for a Zoom call? I had no idea what I was doing. So I figured, well, that's the thing about being a production coordinator in film, because I want to just tell a really funny story. You never knew what was going to get thrown at you. Okay, so I won't go into the long version, but there was a group, I formed a group. It was all based out of our union situation, and a Google group for production people. And one gal posted one night, it was around 9 o'clock at night, our time here in Los Angeles. And she posted, producer just walked into the office. We need an elephant on set at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Can anybody help? And I swear, Jean, 15 minutes later, the same gal posted, she goes, oh my God, we have our elephant. Thank you guys. You know, so the power of social media, the
Yes.
power of large groups of people. Anyway, so going back to
Very funny.
going back to the anybody up for a Zoom call, little did I know, I think there were close to 50 of our gals showed up at the first Zoom
Wow.
session. And so that was May of 2020, because that was just a couple of months into the lockdowns.
Yeah.
And so we visited, and you know, the thing is, when you have a large group on Zoom, you don't have a whole lot of chance to really talk.
Right.
Okay. You know, I'm sitting here taking down names because people have their hands raised, and so as time, and then before we got off the first call, it's like, when are we going to do this again? So scheduled it for like 3 weeks later. And before you know it, it was like, when are we doing this again? When are we doing this again? So over the course of the next few months, I don't have to tell you what was going on in our world. It wasn't just the pandemic. It was the elections and the campaigning and the Black Lives Matter, and all kinds of stuff was going on. And as it was when we were in school, and you've read the book, so you really, you come to realize what we thought was normal was having a diverse group of women, girls in our class. So there were the Blacks, and there were the Asians, and there were the Catholics, and there were the Jewish girls. And but because we were so young, we didn't know that this was not normal in 1964. Anyway, so what happened was we had this group of, let's just say 50 or so, 40 to 50 gals that were joining in these Zooms. And we had our Black sisters, and we had a couple of our Asian sisters, and it got intense.
Oh, wow.
It got intense because we're an opinionated bunch, and we realized that there were so many differences, because here we are today, 55 years later, not realizing what, for instance, our Black sisters experienced in 1964, 1965.
Yes.
And now they're telling us,
Wow.
okay? And we're like, and there was even some anger. There was, because everything was so intense last fall, okay, with Black Lives Matter and everything. Anyway, you know Margaret Novak. She's the one who introduced us, okay? And I want to give credit where credit is due to Margaret, because she was really the one who started all of this. We had the Zoom visits, and then Margaret reached out to me and she said, we have a newsworthy story in this.
Mhm.
And I said, oh, okay. How would that work? Because, okay, let's just say we reached out to some journalist or reporter or something. What do we say to them? Okay, if we invited them to the Zoom call with us, then the whole dynamic would shift. There would be a stranger on the call.
For sure.
Right? So that's when I said, why don't we write stories for each other, right? So that we can all say what we want to say. And really, Jean, in the back of my mind, I don't think I ever verbalized this to anybody, but it was like, are we going to survive this?
Yeah.
Right? Because nobody knew. And, being our age, nobody was talking about vaccines at the time or whatever. Right. And so in my mind, it was like, okay, gals, let's leave something for your children and your grandchildren, and for those without,
Right.
for the ages.
Right.
Let's just write. So there was a handful of us at first, like 5 or 8 of us. And another one of the gals, Ellen in Paris, set up a Google Doc site where we could upload our stories and we could all access them and read them. And suddenly, it caught on and it grew to 43 people. It was just extraordinary.
Before we go on into sort of the content of some of these stories, let me back up, because many people out there have no idea what the Girls' High is or was in 1960.
Yeah, and we realize now it's a different school. But
yes.
Go ahead.
So talk to us a little bit about what was this school that had this very diverse student population?
Well, first of all, the school, and I can't off the top of my head give all the history of the school.
No, we don't need all the history.
The school was started in 1848 for girls. I want to say gifted girls, because some of us feel less gifted than some of the others, but our gifts come in many fashions.
Yes.
And anyway, so it is a public high school. There was a girls' school and a boys' school. Central High was the boys' school, and down the street or up the street was Girls' High. And you had to have a certain grade point, or you had to be accepted into Girls' High.
Yes.
And there were close to 500 girls in each class in the 60s. Okay?
Wow.
And ours dwindled. I think there were somewhere about 460, 465 when we actually graduated. So that's a pretty big class. And it's a 4-year school. So you have 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. Right. And so that's the background.
From all over the city.
From all over the city. And that's why if you've read the book, so you come across the subway girls, okay, who were coming from South Philadelphia, and they met each other on the subway and got to school every day. And, I had to take 2 buses in a subway to get to school every day. Unfortunately, or whatever, I got hung up in Center City, Philadelphia, and never found my way to school.
Just so you know, this is in the 70s, no, in the early 80s, I was working in the Office for Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education. And we had a complaint because it was an all-girls school. And the Title IX regulations required that schools be co-ed. And that came from a history of discrimination against women. Leaving them out.
Where was this?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
And the complaint was about the separate schools. Girls' High.
Seeing that they were public.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so they benefited from federal financial aid. Therefore, they fell under the federal law, Title IX, which required. And here's the weird part, is that I know we worked on that issue because all of our hearts were, you got to continue letting this fine school exist, and we can do it that way. But it's like, how do you make an exception when this has been used in the past to leave women out? Do you
Well,
know?
it's
And he,
interesting because Central
yeah,
started bringing girls in to Central. And I just found out recently in the last month or so that Girls High actually has a handful of guys.
is that right? Is
Yeah.
that right? Well, that's changed because I can't remember how the big arguments in our office turned out. I mean, they
Right.
were legal arguments, but they were underneath that was also personal feelings about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I was aware of Girls High since the 80s for that
Wow.
reason. Yeah. Okay. Now, so I interrupted you. So
No.
women suddenly got excited about this possibility of and started writing their stories down, right? 40 something of them, at least 43 of them.
Yes.
Then what happens? We're going to talk about the content, but what do you do with their stories?
Well, first, I just want to interject because there were a couple who's, and I won't single them out in the book, but
Yes.
there were a couple who like, I don't write. What am I going to say?
Yeah.
You know? And I found myself coaching people.
Oh,
It was
wow.
like I really wanted them to be involved because they showed a little bit of interest. I
Yeah.
was going to eke it out of them. So
Yes.
I would get on, personal calls with them and just sort of like, okay, let's just talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And out of that, there are like 3 or 4 of them who were kicking and screaming that did not want to do it, and I wouldn't leave them alone.
That's great. I love it.
So
I
so
love
what was
that.
your question? So
Oh, okay. So now these women are putting their stories up on Google Docs. How do you shepherd them into the shape of a book?
okay. Well, that was a very good question because I was clueless. I mean, at first, the idea was that we would take once we were finished or whatever, we would take them to Kinko's and have them bound and sent to the handful of people who were participating.
Right.
But when we started to read what was being offered up, it was like, wow, these are pretty cool. These are really worthy. And the more, we saw, I was like, okay, what would it take to self-publish?
Hmm.
So this comes back to my film experiences. Find an elephant for
Yeah.
tomorrow morning.
Right.
So I looked into self-publishing and talked to couple of different entities, and finally decided. Oh, here was the other thing, and I hate talking about this, but people are going to want to know this. It's like I know as soon as money gets involved, dynamics change.
Oh, of course. I hadn't even thought about that.
And so, knock on wood, I did well in my life and, invested and whatnot. And I thought, okay, if I start making a collection for money from everybody to self-publish, because you have to pay for your
Yes, you do.
self-publishing,
Yes, you
right?
do.
Um, then everybody's going to have something they have to say and feel like, and
Right.
having been through things like this before, it's like, I don't want that. I
Yep.
want to just do it
Yep.
because you get hogtied,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
So I looked at my finances. I found out how much it was going to cost. I said, okay, are you willing to lose a certain amount of money
Yeah.
if this thing doesn't fly?
Yeah.
And I believed in it so much, Jean, that I said, I'm going for it.
I
And
admire that.
and I want to interject here now. I have recouped all of my money, and we are in scholarship mode.
That
And
is very unusual, I have to
it
tell you.
is, but here's the other thing: because there's 43 of us,
Yeah.
there's 43 of us working it.
Oh, that's so true, because that's what it takes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if it's just one person, you only have, the people and this, but 43 of us. Now, I'm not going to say that every single one of us have participated greatly, some more than others, but that's
Right.
bound to happen.
Right.
Maybe some not at all. Yeah, there's a couple of those.
Yeah.
So, but I think collectively, it really took that team effort of moving it and shaking
Gosh,
it.
that's a story in itself. Yeah,
There's a lot of backstories in
yeah,
itself. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So did you actively edit any of the stories?
okay, so here's what happened. Um, when I looked into the editing and proofreading that would come from the publisher, it would have doubled the costs.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So being that we were girls, hi girls.
We can do this. We don't need them.
Okay, who are the grammar police out there? So and you can read this in the acknowledgements. Two gals offered to do the first round, Marcia and Fran,
Mhm.
and they literally split up by the alphabet the stories and dealt with each writer individually,
Wow,
proofing. Now,
wow.
editing is another story
Yeah,
because
so they were doing technical proofing, not
technical proofing.
content
Right?
editing.
I mean,
Yeah,
and depending on the person that they were dealing with, a lot of sensitivity in
yep,
around
yep,
for some of the people.
yep.
But I also want to tell a funny story in regards to mine because Fran got my story.
Uh-huh.
And she was, and here's the other thing, Jean, and to our audience, many of us didn't know each other in high school.
Yes.
This is one of the most profound parts and beautiful parts of what happened is we we found new relationships and new friendships
Wow.
on this journey. And anyway, but so Fran had my story,
Uh-huh.
and she was meant to edit it, and she was really intimidated by um, having to proofread mine. And as I sort of said earlier, I was always cutting high school, and I went to summer school for 4 years, and I was one of those bad kids, but
Right.
I survived. And anyway, she got my story, and she tiptoed towards me and said, "Well, um, you know, you have a lot of semicolons in your story."
Right.
And I said, "I do? How many's a lot of semicolons?" She goes, well, we still have this argument. She said, I think there's 17 of them. And I said, is that a lot? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I think I just discovered semicolons, so I must be having fun with them.
I will tell you, I'm writing a memoir, and my editor at one point early on said, "Stop with the semicolons."
So I said, Fran, just make me look good, for God's sake. That's what you're here for,
Right.
So anyway, so Marcia and Fran went through the stories. We had one gal who was, I'm just going to say, she was a royal pain in the ass.
Got it.
Okay.
Yep.
And I won't go into that story right now unless you sort of eke it out of me later. But anyway, so we did the first round, and then I can't remember exactly what happened, but we felt like maybe we should have another set of eyes. So now we had 4 more volunteers that
Uh-huh.
split them up. Okay.
Yep.
And went another wave. And then, and of course, all these notes were being accumulated and things like that. And then finally, I put my eyes on, and I printed out everything, and I went back through the notes and made sure all the changes were made.
Yeah.
And tweaked it. I mean, I am not, especially with all my semicolons, I'm not part of the grammar police by any
Right.
way, shape, or form. But I could see that if there was a spacing issue or something
Yeah.
that jumped out at me. And the reality is, I mean, you've read the book. I think it's in pretty perfect condition.
I think so too.
So that just shows you what, again, teamwork was all about. and we didn't have to
Absolutely.
spend the extra $3,000 on having
Just
professionals.
amazing. And again, it's a reflection of who the students were
Right,
at Girls High and who
right.
they are still or
Yeah,
yet. Or,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
The
exactly.
interesting thing I found on content is that the writers definitely fall into categories. I loved Girls High. It was the game changer in my life. Or I hated Girls High, And even some of the hated Girls High, it was still a game changer in their lives.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
And they will say that, but
yes,
they were very unhappy,
right,
when there did not enjoy their experience. Okay.
right, right.
Um, any clue as to it, since you've read these probably 50 times more than I've read them, what made the difference in whether someone enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it? Do you have any notion of that?
I have theories about like PMS or menopause, okay?
All right.
And I think it applies here. I think we all come to these situations with who we are,
Uh,
okay? So if like my home life was turbulent, okay? And so I was a rebel,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Other gals were, as they call themselves, goody two shoes, and all they wanted to do was please their parents,
yeah.
okay? There were other gals who would be punished if they didn't do well,
Yes.
okay, or reprimanded. So we come to it with our stuff.
Yeah.
And it's only in retrospect, looking back, can we really evaluate why was I in that mindset
Yeah.
at that age? Well, the first thing, and I keep trying to remind people of this, is we were 14 years old. What did you expect of yourselves
Yes.
or one another? It's
Yeah.
just like when the Black girls were angry at us because we didn't know what they went through.
Yes.
How were we to know?
Yeah.
How were we to know? Especially then. We were
Yeah.
babies.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does. It accounts for it, as you said, at any point in life, who you are accounts for your experience.
Exactly.
You are your experience.
Right. If you have emotional problems or you have psychological problems
Right.
or you have no problems, they're
Right.
going to affect everything that you do.
Now, in
So,
some cases, this was a very rigorous high school. The education
yes.
was rigorous. And in some cases, you had just mean teachers, right? Like your art teacher.
My art
Yeah, your art teacher specifically. Yeah, was terrible. It was that just a,
other people, no, but other people loved her. So
oh, really? Oh,
so
my
here's
goodness.
here's what I think. Again, it's like it's concentrated life.
Yeah.
Chemistry. Not everybody gets along. Not every teacher is going to like every student and vice versa.
The
So,
problem is teachers have such power,
well,
over students
exactly.
and their psychological well-being that, when, as you said, the teacher ripped your painting or your art
My
thing down
painting,
from the wall,
yeah. I
that
was
can,
I and I didn't realize how traumatized I was
yeah,
until 50 some years later.
my goodness.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Can't do that. I was taught you can't do that. And it's like,
Right.
anyway. But there's another, and I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I'll jump in since we're talking about teachers, is the one teacher, the biology teacher. I don't, you know which one I'm talking about. Yeah. That had that horrible situation.
With
That,
the student.
yes, yes.
Yes. Where for those, we should make you read it to find out, but for
Yeah.
those listening, a student committed suicide.
Well, I'm going to stop you there and just
Okay.
say, we believe she committed
Yes. Yes.
suicide because
Yes.
again, and and this was for the audience, for people looking at this interview, watching this interview, We had a gal, the book is dedicated to her. She died between classes in our sophomore year. The assumption was that she committed suicide.
Mhm.
Okay. And again, we're going to tease this and let
But it was
people.
because of the method, not just pure. I mean, it wasn't just pure, oh, she died and we never knew, so we assumed it was suicide.
Well, but in the, it isn't covered completely in the book, but I'll give you an example. There's one gal who writes extensively about it.
Yeah.
And she said that she had committed suicide. And we went back to her and said, because we had consulted with an attorney
Yes.
about liabilities, and
Yes.
each writer was going to be liable, responsible for any problems. And
Right.
so we had to be really careful not to
Of
name names,
course. Of
say
course.
things. And so we had to encourage her not to come out and say that she committed suicide.
Yeah.
Oh God, this horrible accident, I think, just happened outside.
Oh, no.
Um, she, I lost my thought, sorry.
This-
we-
She had written that she had committed suicide. And
Right,
you were
and we
going
we
to-
just wanted to be sensitive to any remaining family members that
course.
might read the book. Her
course.
younger sister was in the school, so there's a possibility that her younger sister would read the book, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, we don't know what happened,
Mhm.
okay?
Mhm.
I will say to the audience, it was about the roof of the school. So
Right.
did she jump?
Right.
Was she pushed? Did she slip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
The bottom line is, we don't really know.
Right. And it affected many, many, many lives.
So many. Oh, I know what I started to say. So in the stories, there was one gal who wrote in the story. She was in the class right before it happened.
Yes.
And I'm trying not to give it away.
Sure.
And and she was convinced that she had committed suicide.
Yes.
There's another gal who doesn't talk about it, but I'm very, very dear friends with her. She's mentioned in my story, and she also wrote. And she was friends with her.
Yeah.
Okay. And she says she did not commit suicide.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So here are two
Yes.
gals
Yes.
who were both in the class, and they both walk away with completely different versions
Got it.
of what happened.
Yeah.
And
Yes, I hear you.
so
Talk to me a little bit about, again, you were writing this mid-pandemic, mid Black Lives Matter, mid Donald Trump, mid all of that. What, in your conversations that you had, were there many of your African-American classmates that participated in the Zoom calls, first of all?
initially, yes. Okay. And there are 5 Black gals in the stories.
Yeah.
I mean, that have written stories, and we have 2 Asian gals who've written stories.
Yeah.
But there was a falling off of some of the Black gals.
Mhm.
And it was kind of heartbreaking at first, because we so wanted every voice to be heard.
Yes.
And to this day, Jean, I can't tell you why they chose not to participate.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
some of
Did some of you, it looked to me like some of you got to relook or recast, especially the women who loved being there and thought it was the ideal place to be in the ideal setting, seemed to do some rethinking and recasting after having some of the conversations.
Yes, it was very thought-provoking.
Yes.
And, I think we've touched on this before. It's like, because we were so young, and because we were not expressing ourselves as teenagers to
Yeah.
one another, we didn't know that
Right.
you had this. I'll give you a great story. One of the gals said, and this was one on the Zoom calls, and this was before the book was even a twinkle in anybody's eye.
Right.
Um, you girls, this was one of our Black sisters saying, you girls think that everybody was out smoking dope and chasing guys and, having a good time. That wasn't our experience.
Mm.
And that was really, I mean, I've paraphrased it and really shortened it,
Right.
but that was really eye-opening because,
Mhm.
as teenagers, you're so self-centered that,
Yes.
the world revolves around your little part
Yes.
of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you didn't realize that somebody else had these experiences. So back to your question, yes, it was very mind expanding.
Right.
Um,
Well, let me ask you this. You can't believe this, but our time
time,
is
yes.
flying. Um, which story or stories surprised you the most?
Hmm. I don't know. I mean, as the editor and as, the sister to all, I
Mhm.
I do have my favorites, but I don't really want to single them out. Um,
Okay, gotcha.
but I will. I don't know that any really surprised me. I'd have to really. I wish you had given me that
Uh,
to think
I
about.
know I didn't give you a
You
heads
know,
up on, and
uh,
we're going to talk
I
about
was
that.
so pleasantly surprised by many of them,
Yes.
I mean, Sylvia Girk Tesler, who was the Woodstock icon, okay, and she writes it in the form of the COVID diary,
Yes.
right? I read that one over and over again,
Yeah.
and there's one line in there that I love dearly, which is, "I miss my brain."
Yeah. It's a great line.
It's
It's
a
a great
great
line.
line. I miss my brain. And it
Well,
was in
what
the context of the pandemic,
were any of the stories, did any of the stories disturb you because either you were so unaware of tragedy in someone's life or accomplishments in someone's life?
There were a couple that surprised me in that, like there were two gals that jump out at me right now, two of the stories where there was abusiveness in their homes.
Yes.
And this ties into what the Black girls were saying, but these two gals worked in factories on the weekends to help
Wow.
support their families. And I don't know that they're in both the stories or either, but it came out in discussions.
Yes.
So part of what you want to say in bringing everybody together is, okay, but then there was so and so and so and so who also had to keep up with their schoolwork and work in a factory on the weekends. So not all of us were smoking dope and playing with boys.
Yeah.
Everybody had different stories. In
Yes.
the hallways of the pink marble halls, we had one experience. And when we went home, there were other experiences.
Yes. That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, I have to tell you that I really hope, but you really got the advantage with 43 people out there selling this book. I really hope that people not involved with Girls High or never heard of Girls High will read this book because it is, there's a couple things. One, seeing the world through the lens of 43 70-year-olds
Mhm.
is for us in our 70s, 80s, and 90s is so good to do, so enlightening. And for me, I found it quite inspirational,
Thank
reading folks' stories. The other is that there's so little out there about us at this age,
you.
just so little. And there's so little about bonds. I mean, we all know that people who go to reunions very often end up marrying someone they knew in high school or were friends with in high school. One of the writers in here, and I can't remember who, um, I think it was in there, it was somewhere else, talked about nobody else knows you in the way that someone who knew you when you were 13 or 14 or 15 or
Right.
16. It's a different lens that's not replicated anywhere else, not in husbands, not in children, not in family. And it accounts for how many marriages, relationships come out of reunions.
Yeah.
And but it's not really been looked at, you know. So I think the story of you all coming together after all these years and reuniting and relearning about each other and about yourselves and creating new relationships is wonderful. Just wonderful.
Thank you for that, Jean, because if you'll notice on the book cover and back cover, I don't mention Girls High because I didn't want it to be just about a
Yes.
Girls High audience, because we felt that it was inspirational and it really was timely on so many levels of surviving a pandemic, being 70 years old, having this common denominator of being teenagers, and now here we are, you know, at this point in our lives. So from your lips to God's ear, we would love for it to find a real audience outside of
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if we only had any like talk show hosts who were 70, it would be helpful.
We're working it. We're working
I bet you are. I bet you are. So tell people how they can get a copy.
Okay, well, this is really good news because we had initially through our publisher, which was bookbaby.com. Okay,
Yes.
so it would be store.bookbaby.com. Okay,
Okay.
we have been on the bestsellers list since our second week out. So it's about 6-7 weeks now on the bestsellers list. So we're thrilled about that.
Of course.
But now we just signed with an independent distributor, Ingram Spark. Now, Ingram Spark is where independent bookshops purchase their books.
Correct.
So there's a new organization called bookshop.org. They represent independent bookshop affiliates. So right now, if you went to bookshop.org and put in your zip code or where you live, you would find an independent bookshop that would get the book for you. I will say that we're not making hardly anything on those sales. And so if your readers want to help contribute, because we didn't touch on the scholarships.
All right. Yeah, feel free.
Once we got back our seed money, all the proceeds are now going to scholarships for girls at Girls High. And so we do make a much better royalty on store.bookbaby.com. So I don't know if you're going to put that up on your screen.
Okay. So people would not find you on Amazon?
Amazon is only a Kindle version.
I see. Okay.
Okay. So we set that up again because of royalties. Amazon was going to take too much money from us. And so again, initially out of the gate, we wanted to try to recoup the money and right now we're doing the bookshop.org and the independent bookstores. And we're actually having an event on the 26th with an independent bookstore in Chestnut Hill, Pennsylvania.
Oh, those are fun.
A live Zoom event with us. And so we're really, really excited. And they have collected over $200 in donations for our scholarship already.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
So there's a buzz out there.
I hear that. Okay, give the site for Book Baby again so people can get their copy.
It is store, STORE.bookbaby altogether.com.
Okay.
And then the name of the book is Unmute Yourself, Girlfriend.
Fabulous. Well, yay.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, this has been fun. I knew this was going to be fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I did too. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I wish you well. Do you want to give any, I have no idea, but do you want to give a way to communicate with you in case anybody has questions or would like to communicate about the book or anything?
Sure. I have an unmute yourself girlfriend at gmail.com. All together, unmute yourself girlfriend
gmail.com. That's great, because people, they want to, you know, I have this, and then I have a Facebook group that is Old Women Who Write.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of women on there, and they were interested in this book, and they
Oh,
may want to, if
fantastic.
they're watching it, they may want to contact
Fantastic.
you. So
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
We
Take care.
will. Bye.
Bye.